Welcome to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Welcome back, everybody. Lots to cover here, so let me just get right to it. First of all, probably by the time this airs, there may or may not be a verdict in the Donald Trump trial, one way or another. I'm not worried about it. I think he's insulated one way or another. I think he's protected. I don't think that any verdict, one way or another, certainly a guilty verdict in this particular case, would stand up to any kind of an appeal. The appeal would destroy it, is essentially what I'm trying to say, and I'm not worried about it in the slightest. I think that entire trial, while it's waking some of the more base level individuals up to, the fake Bolshevistic word of lawfare and the weaponization of the so-called justice system against a particular individual, even though it's being weaponized against all of us all of the time, regardless of whatever happens to any of us or what we do or don't do. It's still waking people up, which is great. I think that's good, and he's clearly taking the proverbial slings and arrows for a great deal of individuals. Certainly, again, it's sort of a baseline viewpoint for individuals to pay attention to. And again, if that wakes individuals up, then so be it. That's a good thing. But either way, with that aside, here's where I wanted to start, and it pertains actually to this show specifically. And I'm not sure if I've brought this up before. I don't think that I have, but I do want to mention this very quickly. Since this show has been in existence, and again, it's not a large show by any stretch, but I'm grateful for everybody who listens and the people who listen to the content on this show and the things that, of course, I bring to individuals' attentions and the numerous other posts from endless other people all around the world, and sort of all bring it to bear here and try to sift through it and organize it in a timely fashion as best that I can. There have been a few posts, and I specifically am referencing some comments that have been made by these anonymous individuals who will reach out to me either on Rumble, and it's usually on Rumble, although sometimes it's over email, and in many cases that's the case too. And then occasionally it's been on BitChute also. I don't know who these individuals are with the offer that they make, but basically what they've done is they've said things like, "Hey, look, it looks like you have a great show. We gave it a listen. We really enjoy it. We're shocked at the organization of the show and how it has, and how based on that it has very few listeners or not a lot of clicks or whatever else." And they basically ask me to reach out to them to what I assume can only be that I pay them some kind of a fee or something in order to increase the clicks and the likes and the shares, if not the manufactured comments underneath the show itself. And I want you to know that I've told these people to go pound sand. Because time and time again, they'll even get very specific and they'll say, "We're interested in growing your show. We can give you," and this is almost a direct quote, "we can give you 1,500 likes likes and views and clicks per episode within the next 2 weeks." Ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing organic about that. There's nothing authentic about that. All that means is that they're going to throw the entire show into some algorithm or some farming agent that ends up causing the show to receive more and more clicks so that somebody looks at it and then they say, "Oh, look how many clicks this has. Maybe I should look at this too." Or they'll say, look at the number of subscribers that this individual has or this channel has. Maybe I should look into them, and maybe maybe that's the kind of show that I should listen to, and whatever else. The point is that it's not authentic, and that there are endless individuals out there attempting to solicit money from me and certainly all of these other shows, which should make individuals question the authenticity of a lot of these other shows. And I've brought that subject up before, that many of the ones that, of course, remain on YouTube, they remain on there because of the lack of conversation that they have and the lack of real objectivity and real history that they bring to bear. They have these very basic level stupid conversations about things that don't matter. And yet at the exact same time, they're being pushed, funded, and marketed by the same Jewish lobby that is responsible for endless amounts of corruption in almost every single corporation and facet of society. So, just in brief, I wanted to let people know that you are the ones who share this show. You are the ones who subscribe. It's all free. I don't ask anybody to pay. All of the content is there for free. Same thing on Substack. Same thing with the war videos. It's all free. And it's all there because it's all authentic. So I'm not going to whore out the show by paying somebody to artificially manufacture likes, clicks, subscribes, thumbs ups, whatever the hell you want to call them, in order to trick people into believing that there are more people listening to the show than there actually are. I'm not interested in thousands and thousands and thousands of subscribers or whatever other numeric calculation a person may be interested in. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in whether or not an individual learns on their own. Maybe they need a little bit of a nudge, and then they apply what they've learned into their own lives. That's the action that I've always been interested in, and that's the action that I know for a fact is happening with what goes on here with this show. So again, I wanted to let you know that that is a thing, that actually happens, that I've been reached out to by individuals or groups or whomever. I don't know who these people are. And I typically don't respond other than to say something like, and I think I responded maybe once or twice, I said something like, I'm not going to pay for what you're offering. So if you're going to give me something for free, sure, I'll take it. But I'm not going to pay you to artificially create something that is about as organic as it could possibly get here. So there you go. Just wanted to mention that to you. That's my take. In fact, very quickly, that kind of brings in this too. This was another clip that I saw just the other day. There's a podcast that exists, and I'm sure many of individuals have seen this clip or seen clips like it from this particular podcast, but it's a podcast that's apparently called At Whatever, or the Whatever Podcast, or something like that. And it's on YouTube. So it's certainly not much of like a radio show kind of platform like I try to make this. But at the exact same time, it's these younger guys, and they're usually sitting on one side of a table, and then there's these younger girls who are sitting on this other side of the table, and it's usually this back and forth about society and culture and morals and this, that, and the other. Well, there's a clip bouncing around, which I'll show you on the next war video on Saturday night. And Lauren Witzke put this out on Gab, and I thought it was absolutely hilarious. And then I saw it on some other chat boards. But it was just your stereotypical shut it down. Don't bring up Mossad. Don't bring up the CIA. Don't bring up anything having to do with any Jewish influence whatsoever. And there was a female guest who was on the show, and she was surrounded by other females, and then the male host and a couple other males were there, I think, too. But she basically started to get into how Mossad and the CIA are responsible for brainwashing individuals into believing particular things, and then, of course, doing particular things and wasting their time with materialistic things and so on and so forth. As soon as the girl said, she said CIA, I think, first, and then she said Mossad, or she said Mossad CIA. As soon as she said that, the male host of the show instantly shut it down. He went, nope, can't talk about that, nope. And then that was it. And then that's the end of the clip. Now, I would have loved to have seen the before and after of that particular video clip, but that right there, ladies and gentlemen, should show you that if you exist on a platform like YouTube, you're only there because you're playing the Jewish lobby game. You're only there because you're not calling out real history. Or I should say, calling out fake history and then bringing in to bear real history and why we are where we are now and what exactly is going on. So that's the real issue here. And those podcasts, ladies and gentlemen, exist everywhere. They are all over the place. They dominate the entire sphere of an individual or individuals having microphones in front of them. Again, there are many out there who are not like that, as we fully know, and We know what those shows are and where those shows exist. But again, if you're on YouTube, it's almost by default that you are either funded, marketed by, or in league with the moneylenders and the Jewish lobby and all of the individuals that are pushing that out there. And that is a giant on purpose, which is exactly what that female guest was pointing out. And then, like I said, and like you'll see and you'll hear in the war video, she immediately was shut down. This is the enemy that we're up against. This is the brainwashing. This is the control. It's the illusion of a freedom that exists that actually does not. And there are multiple dimensions and multiple levels to this. So I wanted to make mention of that too. There was also this, and this is kind of a side note before I get into a larger point here that I want to mention, just sort of society-wise and geopolitically wise. There was an audio clip that I put out on Gab the other day, and I don't think I'll put it in the war video because it's one of those, I think, audio clips, and it's a slight video of a woman talking into a microphone, so she's on her own show. But she's talking about the closures of all of these fast food chains and these sit-down restaurants that used to exist back in the day but don't anymore. And I mean, let's face it, they don't serve healthy food. But I want you to hear her, and I want you to hear her run down the names of these restaurants, and then I want you to hear her describe who she blames for the closures of all of these restaurants. And there's actually a hidden reason, although it's not hidden, it's very well known to many of us, as to why these restaurants are closing. And it's not just because of increased pricing, and it's not just because of the illegal shutdowns that happened back in 2020 and the years after. It's not just because of all of that. It's because of another reason. And I think you know what it is. But I'm going to play this audio first, and then I'll get into that after the audio. So give this a listen in 3, 2, 1.
A new list for you. New list of restaurants closing in 2024. Oh, that'd be now. Ready? Fuddruckers is expected to close all of its locations by the end of the year. I love Fuddruckers. Thanks, Joe. Old Country Buffet closing all of its remaining locations. Biscuits and gravy. Really? IHOP closing 100 locations. Buffalo Wild Wings closing all of its Canadian locations, as well as 60 in the United States. Applebee's closing 35 restaurants. Red Lobster closing 50 locations as they enter bankruptcy. Denny's closing 20 locations by the end of the year. Marie Callender's Great Pie closing all of its remaining locations. Pizza Hut planning to close 500 restaurants. Outback Steakhouse closing 41 of their 700 locations. Sbarro is closing a total of 50 locations, with majority being mall locations. Marty or Mard Pizza closing a total of 27 locations. Ruby Tuesday closing 16 restaurants. BDQ closing 8 of their 59 locations. Joe's Crab Shack is closing 41 of its 60 restaurants. If you guys ever had one of those, Bonefish Grill closing 7 restaurants. Oh, wait a minute, there's more. Middle out, bottom up. Johnny Carino's closing 30 locations. Quiznos Subs, 140 locations. Shuttered Macaroni Grill. God, they've got a good margarita pizza. 31 restaurants. TGI Fridays, 233 restaurants. Corner Bakery Cafe closing 104 locations. Au Bon Pain, 100 stores. And I still don't know how to say that word. O'Charlie's, 64 restaurants. And 91 Boston Market locations, poof, are going away. Just like $7 billion of student loan debt. Just like that. That's what we call Biden magic.
And just think how many jobs go along with each restaurant closing.
Okay, here's my take on this, and there are many takes to be had. First of all, her naming down the list is fine. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think anybody would. It's good information that knowing that those restaurants are closing. That's good economic information, and it's worth it. With that said, I would call her analysis of it, if you want to even call it analysis, is just very lowbrow, low intellect examination of a much larger problem. And not even a much larger problem, but a very good thing that is also happening. So let me get into the negatives, so to speak, as to why those restaurants are closing. And we know what they are, but I'm just saying this again to expand on her lack of analysis here. First of all, those restaurants are closing because those are what I would call second tier or even third tier restaurants in the restaurant game. Okay, you have your stereotypical drive-through goy slop that people obtain, and then you have a cut above, which is those restaurants and those foods. Go in, sit down, get a drink, order some food off of a menu, and then blah, blah, blah. But then, of course, you have upper tier restaurants or a tier of restaurants that's higher than that, which are restaurants where there are less chains and the food tends to be a little bit better. And then, of course, it tends to be a little bit more expensive. And then, you have very high tier restaurants where there's a strict dress code and the food is usually very good and certainly expensive. With that said, did 2020 and the lockdowns play a role in eliminating those positions and eliminating those locations? Of course it did. Was that on purpose? Of course it was. All of that was a giant on purpose, and all of those variables are certainly being taken into consideration when it comes to why they've closed down and are continuing to close down. But with all of that aside now, let me get into the positives as to why I think this is happening, and there are many positives. The first and foremost positive, I think, is that the Great Awakening has had such a positive impact on so many people and even society that the enemy, of course, is working very hard, and even the low intellect individuals who claim to be awake and are still playing in that left-right paradigm of, oh, it's Joe Biden's fault, and oh, Donald Trump did this, and it's the best thing since sliced bread. It depends, but either way, they're operating on that particular wavelength, which is why she called it Biden magic or whatever tagline she used. Well, there's no analysis there. The Great Awakening waking people up is quite literally God bypassing authority figures, reaching the individual, and then giving the individual the landscape and the viewpoint to say, do you see everything that's happening here? Or at least, do you see a great deal of what's going on? Now let's figure out why it's actually happening. And let's provide some clarity as to why it's really happening. People are waking up to this, and they're waking up to what these restaurants have been doing. And they didn't really even have to spend their money at these restaurants. So is it a money thing? It most certainly is. Is it because they're raising their prices? Maybe. Or it's because people are reprioritizing what they want to spend their money on. And what they're figuring out from a food standpoint specifically is that the food that is offered in those restaurants, by and large, is poison. By and large. I'm not saying that they don't have some good options. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, by and large, it's poison. And it'll put you to sleep as soon as you eat it. With that said, when it comes to money, too, individuals are figuring out that they can spend less money at a grocery store, even today, or even at a farmer's market, on healthier food for their family, purchasing a cookbook, and then looking at what to make with healthier food for their family, and even have leftovers, as opposed to getting in an automobile, spending money on gasoline to drive from point A to point B, buy goy slop for your entire family, drop down a huge bill with a tip included, and then everybody goes home and takes a giant nap. I mean, there's more going on here than just Biden magic, as she points out. The awakening process is hitting individuals on multiple levels regarding multiple subjects of analysis on one particular issue. Again, is it raised prices? Of course it is. But it's also what other people are choosing to do with their money and their time. Now, there's another avenue also. Some of those restaurants that she brought up are sports ball, bread and circus affiliated. Applebee's, for example. Not all Applebee's are loaded with televisions, but have you been in a BW3's lately? The last time I was in a BW3's was with Josiah Richwine. When he came to town and we met up and had some wings and a great conversation. I haven't been in one before that point in I want to say, I don't know, 6 months to a year, maybe before that. And after that, I haven't been to one since. And I can tell you that they are loaded with televisions. There are more televisions in those BW3s today than there were at their inception. They are quite literally at almost every table. So much so, it will give you a splitting headache. I mean, you're talking about flat screen LED, LCD TVs that are the size of a wall. I haven't seen flat screens this big in my entire life. And it's like, I just came in here for food. But then you think about the hypnosis of those televisions and bringing your family together and bringing people together. And then, of course, they're watching sports ball and they're doing this and they're doing that. I mean, it is hypnosis to the nth degree. And there's literally no avoiding it. I mean, you have to go into the bathroom in order to avoid it. And when you're in the bathroom, you can't avoid it because they're blasting music in the flipping bathroom. It's like, I'm just trying to go to the bathroom. But you're hearing this music and it's all designed to be hypnotic. It's all designed to keep you there. So why are they closing all of their BW3 stores or locations, or 60 of them or whatever she said, in Canada? Well, the Canadian government shut down a great deal of that over the course of course, 2020 and the years that followed, but it's also because people are waking up and they don't want to be hypnotized anymore. And once you're awake from the hypnosis, you don't go back. It disgusts you. It becomes disgusting. Even from an auditory standpoint, it becomes disgusting. People hear people talk about it, and it just curls their stomach, and they just think, oh God, like, this is, of all the places to go, you want to go there? I mean, it really is, a fascinating waking up process, but it's a good thing. This is a good thing. This is not a negative Biden magic thing. And yes, jobs are lost. No doubt about it. But if the people working there, who had the skills to work there, all pooled their money together and their resources together, they could start their own place if they really wanted to and were really motivated to do so. But there's also an aspect of this which is important. And it's one that I want to bring up here, and it's one that my dad and I were even talking about the other day, because I gave him a copy of Mein Kampf, and he's been reading it for the very first time, and he's thoroughly enjoying it. And we've been discussing it back and forth. And he brought up the aspect in the book where Adolf Hitler talks about invention and how the goal of the enemy is to destroy the inventor, but also to destroy the mind of the inventor, and then program the inventor into not wanting to invent. And then ultimately, with all of that disruption and discouragement, you discourage the inventor, the individual, from wanting to invent in the first place, let alone collaborate with other inventors. Then, of course, what do you have across the landscape? You have a lack of entrepreneurship. You have a lack of invention. You have a lack of both individuality and a common collective in a good way, for a much better option as opposed to the meat grinder of society that we're always in on a constant basis. And he was right. Adolf Hitler was 100% right. That is part of what destroys a society. That is part of what invites in degeneracy and laziness And then, of course, corruption and 1,000 other things. But this is all being done on purpose. Because again, I've brought this example up too, and the same is true with schooling. And the same is true with education and learning. It's not an accident that at the university and college level, they never teach teacher education students about business, about the actual job itself, and then, of course, how to run your own business. The last thing they're going to do in a teacher education program is teach a person who wants to be a teacher to work with other like-minded teachers to create their own school. They're never going to do that. That never happens. And I can't emphasize the word never enough. It's a word that I rarely use, but the word never in that case is a hard never with a capital N. It is never. They never do it. And it's completely intentional. And it's completely intentional, again, because they don't want people to get away from the system and out of the matrix. They want them in it. And they don't even know that a matrix exists. This is just the way that they, of course, are all trained to be professors, and this is the way that it is. Now, there's a little bit of a reach-out program now that exists, and programs like it in A Frame of Mind, or in the teacher education program, for example, in colleges and universities, albeit they're all failing. But even so, they're asking their teacher educators to reach out to not just public schools, but even private schools and charter schools to either do their student teaching or actually apply to those places in the future. But imagine the former happening instead. Imagine teacher education students at the university level actually taking their own innovation, working together, and collaborating away from the university while attending the university, but collaborating on their free time away from that and saying, we need to save our money, pool our money, do whatever we need to do, and then we can start our own small private school with just us. And we can be objective and independent in our curriculum, and we can be objective and independent in our reach out, and we can provide an alternative to the public school system. Yes, that takes a lot of foresight, and it takes a lot of knowledge in order to have that kind of motivation. But that's my point. My point is that society consistently is destroying that kind of mental prowess and that kind of innovation, and that destruction is intentional. That is the enemy. And anybody who is behind that, and we know who they are, anybody who's behind that is the problem. Because in a free and open society, where innovation should be rewarded and accepted, it clearly is not. The only thing that's rewarded and accepted is the status quo. That's it. That's why they still have Teacher of the Year awards and 1,000 other things. They're really just rewarding the status quo. They're rewarding the individual who goes along to get along and does exactly what they're told all of the time, no matter what. That's the much larger problem here. So back to the restaurants very quickly, same kind of thing. There are endless positives that exist with those, but if those positives aren't focused in on by the larger of society, then the real message is being missed. And the real message with those restaurant closures is, yes, there's a flip side to that coin. The one side, of course, was that it was all the COVID lie, it was government overreach, it was 1,000 things destroying people's livelihoods, etc., etc. Flip the coin over. Now on the other side of the coin is people are reprioritizing their lives, the money they're spending, what they're spending it on. They're learning to grow their own food, cook their own food for the very first time in their lives. And they're realizing that the thing that they were working for, that machine, will always let them down. No matter what. It's always going to let you down. But again, you add in the sports ball, the TV, the societal hypnotism, 1,000 other things. People are running away from that. They're all running away. Only the most hypnotized are remaining. Only the people stuck in the matrix are the ones remaining. Because as we all know, when you're awake, you never go back to sleep. It's impossible. Which is why hearing the people who are not awake is repulsive to most of us. And it hurts us. I mean, it physically and mentally drains us because, you can get overwhelmed by hearing the people who are not awake. Which leads me now to this. This is an even sort of larger point that I wanted to make, and I even made a meme of it, and I put it on Gab, and it'll be in the war video, but I want to bring up two examples here of something that has been going on for a very long time, and I'm going to use this one example first. I have a number of examples, and you know exactly what I'm talking about when I bring this up, but it has to do with the emotional reaction that people will have when you expose the truth to them, or they hear something that counters their belief system. Or even more specifically, the Socratic method is used where questions are asked to an individual. The individual is sort of backed into a metaphorical corner, so they think, even though they're not being backed into a corner. They're being asked to engage in a dialogue and have a critical thinking exercise placed on them, but that's not how they receive it. They receive it as being threatened, or they're being insulted, or whatever it may be. So let me give you the first sort of very brief example, and everybody will know who I'm referencing here. Remember in 2016, it would have been 2017, on Inauguration Day when Donald Trump was being inaugurated, you had, it's a forever meme of the girl wearing the glasses with the lime green vest, and she's got the stocking cap on, and she's on her knees, and she yells out the word no at the top of her lungs and screams it with everything that she had. Okay? That emotional reaction is exactly what happens when you've been led along for endless amounts of months, years, if not your entire existence, believing that something is one way and that something could never happen, and then it happens. It's not that the thing that's happening is bad, or that the thing that you're being exposed to is bad. It's that your belief system is eroding, or has been eroded regarding a singular issue. So that emotional response and that emotional reaction is the default setting among the brainwashed who still live in the matrix. And that right there is quite literally a glitch in the matrix for that individual, and they don't understand that it's actually a good thing. That's the short-circuiting that's taking place in their own body to try to pull them out of the matrix, away from the metaphorical Agent Smith, away from Satan, and toward God and the truth. That's what that really is. Now, let me give you another example. I'm going to play both of these clips, by the way, in the next war video on Saturday, and you'll be able to physically see it. And I want you to see these clips because it has more of a, it'll give you more of a sense, rather than just hearing it, it'll give you more of a sense of exactly what I'm talking about. And again, we all have personal experiences with this, with people that we know or people we've encountered. And again, that's why I'm bringing this up, is because I know that it's almost ubiquitous across the listening audience here and across many others. But there's a clip, first of all, of a guy and a woman, and they're sitting at a table inside of a New York subway system. And he has a table set up, and there's a camera in front of the table, and both participants have a microphone, or he is holding a microphone. And he's basically just having a dialogue with anybody who sits down and wants to talk. And he starts off by asking them how they're doing and whatever else, and they say, well, I'm okay, or whatever else. But either way, it's this guy and this woman who appears to be Jewish, potentially. But either way, she's older than he is. He's either Hispanic or mixed race or whatever it may be, but he's sitting there, and he starts to ask her about who is responsible for, the economic turmoil and so on and so on. And her answer is that it's all white CEOs, and I'm paraphrasing her, but I'm emphasizing the term white here. She says white CEOs, white corporation presidents, the owners of these corporations who are white, and so on and so on and so on. And she says white over and over and over again. And then what he says is he asks her, are you aware of who works in Biden's administration? And that the vast majority of these individuals happen to be Jewish. And he says something like undercover Jews. That's the term he uses. And then again he runs down the list of a few individuals, and that's essentially it. But as soon as he says that right there is where the emotional reaction starts to take place with her. And you can physically see her start to recoil and lean back in her chair, and then she gets sort of a shocked/panicked look on her face, because for this entire time, she has believed, as she's probably a leftist also, she's believed that these individuals are white, when in fact they are not, by and large. She says, again, all of the people running the money and the banks, and they're all white. Well, they're not. And he pushes this on her, and not forcefully. He's very polite the whole time, but he simply says, well, as it turns out, they're not white. They happen to be Jewish. And then she, like I said, recoils, and she says, so what are you, and she says, and then again, this is where she reverts to an emotion as her response. She says, I feel like I'm being trapped. Well, that's a feeling. So there goes her feelings. Now her feelings are at the forefront, not her perception of facts that she allegedly had on her side, which she didn't have at all. See, this is why therapists make a killing. I mean, therapists make a killing because they don't get down to brass tacks with their patients. A therapist's patient is a weekly, monthly, and yearly paycheck for them. If therapists were really doing their job, they would tell the truth to their patients would leave, and then they would never come back because their patients would know what the truth is. But that's not how therapy works. Therapy picks sides, justifies sinful behavior, and gives it names and 1,000 other things, and before you know it, the therapist has a lifelong friend and somebody who's willing to pay them. But what this woman does is she recoils, and then her default setting is nothing but emotion. The same is true in this second interaction, where it had to do with a guy who's standing on a sidewalk in what appears to be, a downtown area or a city or something along those lines. And he has a poster that has to do with abortion and the abomination of abortion. And it's a hand-drawn or painted picture of what is a hand with blood on it and a fetus inside of the palm of the hand. And it basically says, abortion is murder or something along those lines, which clearly it is. But a woman is passing with her daughter, and the woman has like a milkshake in her hand, and the little girl is holding an ice cream cone, and the woman, having seen the poster and walking past the individual, turns around and looks at him and says, your poster is false. That's not true regarding abortion. And she says, I moved here to this state, whatever it is, Oregon or Washington or something, to get an abortion, she said. And he said, well, I'm sorry about that. And she said, well, it was a dead fetus or a dead embryo, and it needed to be removed. That's why I moved here to abort it. And then she says, the vast majority of abortions are just dead embryos that are already dead. And then he counters back and he says, no, statistically, that's not true at all. And then he starts to mention a few more things. And then she immediately, and I would say even quicker than the last woman, she immediately reverts to, or her default setting when faced with something she doesn't want to hear because it counters her comfortable delusion. She immediately reverts to, again, her default setting of you're wrong, and then it's name calling. You're an asshole, you're this, you're that, and blah, blah, blah. And then she resorts to physical violence, and she attacks him and the poster, breaking the poster, and then throws her milkshake on top of him. And then he tackles her and subdues her, and that's the end of the video. Now, I hope she was arrested for felony assault and battery. She should have been. But that right there, again, is so common among the brainwashed and the mentally ill that it is happening with those that have believed nothing but lies their entire life, and they do not want to hear the truth because it counters their lies. So yeah, you're up against narcissism, cognitive dissonance. There's a million other names for it. Emotional rationalization, projection, whatever it may be. All of it is a justification for just being wrong. And then, of course, being sinful with your action. So that's what we're up against here. And again, as we know, that's one of the harder things to experience, and that's one of the harder things to witness on a constant basis because it's prevalent. It's everywhere. It's overwhelming. So again, keep your eyes out for individuals who do that. You start to have a conversation with them, and I know we've been doing it this entire time for a very long time, myself included. And of course, I've been on the raw end of that before in numerous situations where you expose the truth to either an individual or a group, and then they recoil. And then they have an emotional outburst, and then their emotional outburst is quite literally more irrational than anything that they did previously, even though that everything that they did previously was irrational. But there's no question asking. There's no critical thinking. There's no, okay, that's interesting you said that. Can you provide more evidence as to why you said that? There's no question back, which is, as we all know, an even larger problem, which is an individual's inability to question anything by literally asking questions, and quite specifically, I should say, asking questions. It's been rooted out of them because of the hypnosis and the brainwashing in society. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm just going to say that right there, in my opinion, should be the ever-present thing that we're consistently paying attention to when it comes to interactions between people, whether we know these individuals or we don't, whether these individuals exist on the TV or in video clips that we see or they don't. The evidence is everywhere. It's the dead giveaway that the Matrix has them by the throat. And as soon as they start to squirm, even shake their neck a little bit to try to get out of the Matrix by being exposed to the truth, the devil himself will squeeze. And when he squeezes the throat, then what happens with the individual's response back? It's highly emotional, it's irrational, if not downright violent. Look at Robert De Niro the other day. Same thing. Same exact thing. And he's been tied to Roman Polanski, and he's been tied to child trafficking and human trafficking in France. I mean, he's a criminal, allegedly, of the highest order, allegedly. So he's going to have an emotional outburst, and he's going to be paid to show up to distract. And that's the way that is. But there are endless individuals like him all throughout society, and they're not going away. They're just going to continue to become more irrational in a ever-present and ever-growing rational society. And I hope that our society is continuing to become more irrational because it's the irrational that are standing out like a sore thumb. And I'm afraid that's going to continue to happen. So there you go. Okay. With that aside, moving on. 2 education stories, and then I have a great deal of jab information to bring, including some stuff from the WHO, which, as you might expect, no one's even touching with the 10-foot pole. But first, there was this regarding education. This was thrown to me by a family member the other day. This is from The Blaze. It was titled, Tennessee Parents and Children Arrested After Brawl Breaks Out During Kindergarten Graduation. Again, I'll let you fill in the blanks and use your imagination as to who could have possibly engaged in this kind of behavior. But either way, It says the following. It says 10 adults were involved in the dispute. It says footage was captured and shared on social media of at least 10 adults and children fighting during a kindergarten graduation in Tennessee. The incident took place earlier this month. The graduation erupted into chaos after two women attending a kindergarten graduation at Buckley Carpenter Elementary in Somerville exchanged blows in the crowd, according to WHBQ. It says the two adult women involved in the dispute have been identified as Kiera Smith and Tyesha Humphreys. They could be seen fighting on the gymnasium bleachers. Others in attendance tried to get away from the dispute. I got hysterical. The police called the ambulance, it says. But that was not the only fight that took place at the graduation. Two others could be seen trading blows on the basketball court. When the authorities finally got involved, Humphreys insisted that Smith started the altercation, while Smith said that Humphreys was responsible. So who's the child here? Who are the children? Again, fighting in the middle of a kindergarten graduation. Couple of things. First of all, this is part of the wussification, if you want to say it, of our society, is that we actually have kindergarten graduations, and that this is a thing, and that this is considered to be okay or normal. Well, you're graduating from kindergarten. Give me a break. I mean, give me a break. We didn't have this when we were in school. Do families teaching their children at home, do they do this? Do they gather in front of the fireplace and have their own ceremonies? Congratulations, you've graduated from this level to this level and blah, blah, blah. I mean, what a waste of time, but also just a complete lack of civility in a location that clearly is supposed to be a civil one. But as we know, those environments aren't for everybody. So there you go. Here's another one. This having to do with money. Cicely sent this to me from New Mexico, and goodness gracious, this is odd. Here's the title. New Mexico teachers can apply for $5 million student loan forgiveness on June 1st. This is from Santa Fe, New Mexico. It says applications will open June 1st for a program providing $5 million in student loan forgiveness for teachers in New Mexico. The New Mexico Higher Education Department's Teacher Loan Repayment Program will accept applications until August 1st. Last year, over 1,000 teachers applied in record numbers. Any licensed New Mexico teacher working in high-need, quote-unquote, fields and schools are eligible for up to $6,000 per year for 2 years toward the principal, debt, and interest on federal student loans related to their teacher education. Eligible teachers must be U.S. citizens, New Mexico residents for 12 or more consecutive months, hold a New Mexico teaching license, taught at least 3 years in New Mexico. They will give priority to teachers with endorsements and those who are active in these areas as defined as quote-unquote high need. Bilingual education, early childhood education, special education, STEM, career technical education. Now, I'm no genius, but doesn't this sort of, discriminate? I mean, isn't this discrimination? Again, they're basically catering to certain fields that probably cater more toward minority students in minority environments, as opposed to other individuals who might not teach in those environments, nor teach those subjects, nor at those grade levels. It just seems like blatant discrimination to me, clearly. And for such a thing to be approved, it would certainly have to be approved by the leftist government, which, as we know, would discriminate certainly against whites, if not endless other individuals who might actually work in a healthier environment. But again, if you're a minority and you work in maybe a less healthy environment, then you're the only one that's allowed to have your student loans partially paid off to some extent. Again, 2 checks of whatever they said, $6,000 apiece. It's discrimination. They should be sued for discriminating. If you're going to engage in student loan forgiveness, it should be for everybody. I don't know why there would be all of the parameters other than, of course, for the sole purpose of discriminating on purpose. So, seems like a lawsuit there. Seems like a rather large one, actually. Okay. Hopefully there will be one. Time will tell. Let me mention this, just kind of lastly here regarding this particular subject, certainly in education, and this can be certainly worked, I think, into multiple avenues of thought here, but this has to do with an application that allegedly has a great deal to do with child trafficking, if not downright human trafficking, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention. This particular article was from the Daily Caller, and it has to do with an application called Fly Me Out. And this again was a post that was made on greatawakening.win, but I wanted to read this to you just so that we are aware of this. It was titled, Elites Found Another Way to Human Traffic Pretty Girls for the Obscenely Rich. It says the following regarding, again, the application of what they're calling Fly Me Out. Here's what it says. It says, elites have found another way to make sex trafficking upscale with the new app Fly Me Out. It says, while the app's terms of service claim the company, quote, stands firmly against any form of exploitation, especially those involving minors or human trafficking, unquote, this is essentially what it will be accomplishing. In what world will a wealthy man with access to a private jet and a sprawling suite with pool and dome views in Greece spend the time or money on an 18-plus woman and not expect more than a smile when the sun goes down? In the age of OnlyFans, our culture has become so disconnected from morality and desensitized by degeneracy that Fly Me Out will seem like a low-risk way for women without the means to travel themselves to find their way to beaches they otherwise wouldn't. But at what cost? It says, because we glorify instant gratification and trade sex for likes, it won't even register to these women that their future husbands will be horrified to learn of their willingness to give themselves to a stranger for the chance to take Instagram pics on the beach. In 10 years, Reddit will be filled with posts of 30-something men who found out that the mother of their children used to be a frequent flyer on beachthought.com and find themselves asking, am I the a-hole for looking at my wife differently, knowing she sold herself for a trip to Dubai? It's hard to judge who is more in the wrong here. Is it the rich men who know their wealth can buy bodies, or the women who know their bodies are up for sale? Either way, this can only end badly for the women used by Fly Me Out. How are we supposed to market a traditional life with more meaning when our culture sells trips to Paris for the small, quote-unquote, price of women's souls, unquote? Agreed. So that exists. Fly Me Out, apparently. I'm, of course, not endorsing it by any stretch of the imagination, and just wanted to bring that to your attention. In fact, very quickly here, just kind of getting back to the education story real quick, when it comes to the business of discrimination. You, of course, have heard me talk about the discrimination that certainly takes place in higher education. I'm using that term loosely, quote unquote, higher education. When it comes to hiring white individuals and individuals who are Christians and individuals who are knowledgeable and a number of other things. And of course, all of those diversity tags that are placed on job postings, which essentially means, again, whites need not apply. As you heard me mention earlier this week regarding that Supreme Court ruling, again, having to do with individuals who are being discriminated against in the workplace, in particular if they're white, based on DEI programs and a number of other things, that now it's open season against these individuals in these DEI programs if people actually knew that it was legal open season on them. But there's something, of course, that's been happening across the United States, and it's also a giant on purpose. And it, of course, has to do with the purposeful non-hiring of individuals who happen to be white and Christian, and if they're unvaccinated and or patriots of our country and love our country. So there was this particular post because, again, I think this just exemplifies the much larger issue that's actually happening, whether people are commenting on it with regularity or not. And there were actually 51 comments associated with this post. I'm not going to read the comments, but I do want to read the post. It says, prayers, please. That's what it was titled. It says, I'm an 8-year veteran. And the reason that they say that is because they tell everybody to not make the same mistake. They essentially advocate for people to not enlist in the military. But then they went on and they said, and my wife as well. They said, we can't find work since being part of a layoff last September. We have applied to over 100 companies and denied before interview on all but 2. I was stood up for an interview twice by the same company and then denied when I applied again. These are the things against us: white, Christian, patriots, unvaxxed. There are many in worse positions than we are, but would really be thankful for prayers on our behalf. Thank you all very much, and God bless you," unquote. Yes, this is, first of all, you have my prayers without a doubt, and this is a thing. This is happening. So, again, keep that in mind. These individuals with their DEI programs, as we've known for a very long time, it is the illusion of open discrimination, which is exactly, again, what it is. It is open discrimination. There's also this post that I wanted to read, and then I have jab-related things to mention here. It says the following, and it was titled the following: does anyone else feel like something bad is about to happen, like the feeling in your gut? They said, quote, I know we've all experienced some kind of shoe-to-drop for a really long time. And I'm going through my own personal issues now, and I know the world has quite a bit going on as far as problems and things to be concerned with: inflation, physical wars, psychological warfare, CERN, so many things. But honestly, they said something just feels off. I can't really put into words what the feeling is. For a lack of words, it just simply feels like something very bad is on the horizon, like days away. I'm feeling like apocalyptic type. They said it's almost like a gut or intuition feeling. To add to it, things just don't feel normal. Like this reality, the fabric of this reality, just don't seem to feel the same as they did 4 years ago. Sure, that could be demoralization tactics that are being used, but I've had some very, very odd things occur that I just simply can't explain. Feeling really uneasy last few days, like we are teetering on something massive. Does anyone else feel this way? Unquote. I personally would say that that's almost a perpetual feeling for those of us who are certainly awake. We're the ones sort of teetering on this, okay, what is the next shoe to drop? What exactly is going to happen? But it's also a manifestation, I think, of us wanting to make our own reality, and us wanting to also focus on the positive in a sea of negative at the exact same time, and being able to take in, both aspects of that equation, which of course can be remarkably exhausting, which is why I recommend people have healthy outlooks and healthy habits to engage in, not to distract them and not to take their mind off of what's going on in the world, but to, I guess, calm their mind as much as humanly possible. But yeah, it's warfare, and it's no different. Again, I've never been in an actual physical war, by being in a trench and being shot at or anything like that. But when you're not being shot at, you're waiting as to whether or not you're going to be shot at. If you've been bombarded with rocket-propelled grenades or ammunitions of other kinds, and then all of a sudden that stops, you can't help but take a nice deep breath and say, well, thank God that stopped. But then at the exact same time, you start thinking, okay, when is it going to pick back up again? When is something else going to happen? And I think that that's just normal. And I think that's normal in all warfare. And I think it's certainly happening now. And I don't think that their feeling is an unusual one. I think that it's remarkably common. Again, I'm not trying to downplay what they're saying. I'm simply raising the relevance of what they're saying. I think it's very relevant. And I think that they're certainly not alone in that regard. I think a lot of us feel that way on a sort of a day in and day out basis. But again, this is where Christ would say, lean on him. Don't lean on man to solve your problems or solve the day in and day out rigmarole of everything that goes on. And we shouldn't, be sitting around our TVs like they did in the movie Cable Guy, waiting for some ruling regarding Donald Trump. People should just live their lives and be aware of what's really happening. And then, of course, try to understand why things are really happening, and not take things at face value, but analyze things and seek understanding. And there are lots of ways to do that. So, I don't know. I don't think they're alone in that regard, is basically what I'm saying. But there you have it. Okay, jab-related stuff. First of all, in the last episode, you heard me bring up how the WHO isn't quitting. And just because there were a couple of headlines, or more than a couple of headlines out there talking about how the pandemic treaty, quote unquote, hasn't been agreed upon and they've failed and the good guys won and blah, blah, blah. Well, as it turns out, you can get on YouTube, on the World Health Organization's website over there on YouTube, or their channel, and you can watch their meetings that are taking place this week, or at least a great deal of them that are happening out in the public forum, which means they're also, of course, meeting behind closed doors. And I watched part of Tedros's speech, and he gave a 10-minute talk at again, this particular conference, which isn't wrapping up until June 1st. And I have to tell you, he's not quitting, and they're not quitting. And we haven't necessarily won anything regarding that, and they haven't lost anything either. So again, if you want to bounce over to the WHO's YouTube channel and click on one of their little conference sessions, just listen to their tones of voice. Listen to their intonation. These are not people who are sounding defeated. These are individuals who are doubling down. The government of Australia has doubled down and tripled down. They are in full agreement with whatever the WHO decides. They want a quote-unquote pandemic treaty. They are going to follow it, as long as the people of Australia follow it anyway, and they shouldn't, for rather obvious reasons. But again, this is their approach. They're not quitting. So just kind of wanted to mention that, and understand that, again, you can bounce over to their YouTube channel and watch a great deal of their presentations and what they're actually talking about. And there are some rooms filled with brainwashed individuals who are all in. They think that all of this is 100% legit and a good idea, that we all need to be on the same page for the health and betterment of everybody in society. And again, they're not quitting. Again, their meetings don't end until June 1st formally. But as we know, they never stop meeting because these people love to have meetings. So there you go. There is a conference, though, taking place right now, and you can watch as much of it as they certainly allow people to watch. So there's that. Okay. There was also this post, and this was also on greatawakening.win. And then they linked a Reuters article from May 30th here, which I want to read very quickly. It says the following, and this was the title of the post. They said, "We're being set up again." And then they said the following. They said, "What exactly has our government learned about mRNA vaccine safety from COVID-19, quote unquote, that the companies that made same? Question mark. Apparently nothing. In spite of congressional hearings, public outcry, and many examples of manipulated and hidden data, shortcut trials, and a medical establishment that is dysfunctionally unable to see the excess mortality, injuries, and worldwide condemnation of the resultant genocide, it presses on, like nothing happened. How long must this continue?" And then they said, I read this today, May 30th, out of Reuters. It said, quote, "The U.S. government is nearing an agreement to fund a late-stage trial of Moderna's mRNA bird flu vaccine." The Financial Times reported on Thursday as the outbreak spreads in dairy cows. This is all a lie. It goes on, it says, Moderna told Reuters that it was in discussions with the government on advancing its vaccine candidate, but did not confirm the funding, saying it has nothing further to add. Federal funding from the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, B-A-R-D-A, could come as soon as next month, and would include a promise to procure doses if late-stage trials are successful, the FT report said, citing people close to the discussions. It says the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, did not immediately respond to a Reuters request for comment. Moderna is testing the experimental shot mRNA-1018 against several strains of the virus, there is no virus, including the currently circulating H5N1 variant. There's no such thing. It says dosing in an early to mid-stage study of the vaccine was completed, and it expects data soon. Shares of the company have risen about 40% since April 1st, when the second known human case of bird flu in the United States was reported. Also a lie. It says the stock was up about 3% at $151.25 in pre-market trading on Thursday. The United States had a stockpile of bird flu vaccines matched with the strain currently circulating, as well as antivirals that could be used to treat human infections. For a major epidemic or a pandemic, however, the country would have to considerably scale up stock. The U.S. government is manufacturing about 4.8 million doses of CSL Squaris bird flu vaccine, if I'm saying that right. It is also in quote-unquote active conversations with Pfizer and Moderna on a potential mRNA vaccine. Last week, U.S. officials confirmed another human infection in the country since the virus was first detected in dairy cattle in late March. And that's the end of the article. Again, all of it is a lie. It's a giant fairy tale. They're writing the script of the fairy tale. They're writing in the statistics, the numbers, the business acquisitions, the conversations, blah, blah, blah. They're doing all of that to set up the fairy tale to sell it to the normies as it being an actual real thing. Now, what are they really doing? They're killing off farm animals. They're paying farmers to just murder and slaughter their chickens by saying, well, have you tested it for bird flu? And then they give it some fake PCR test, and they have the chicken sit on it, or they cram it down the chicken's throat, and then it comes back positive, and they go, bird flu in that chicken, so you'd better kill it, and how many chickens has it been around? Then you have to contact trace all your chickens, and then before you know it, you have no chickens. Well, did the chickens get in the cow pen? Let's go test the cow. And then they have the cow lick a fake PCR test or one of those Binax Now tests that all the other farm animals have been buying at Walgreens and CVS. And they lick it, and then it tests positive, and then they go, here comes the FDA, and you've got to kill your cows too because, well, they're all infected. Only the gullible are going to believe all of this, but what it will do is slaughter, quite literally, no pun intended, the food supply. Because that's the goal. And even Douglas McGregor has brought this up, and he's right. Real revolutions don't happen until the food is gone. The real revolution isn't going to take place until people can't eat. People are already spending more on food than ever before and spending more on slop than ever before. But what if all that disappears? What if the shelves start to go bare? And what if that's intentional? Which, of course, we know that it is. Then what? That's when the real revolution takes place, and he specifically brings up the French Revolution. He said the French Revolution didn't really kick off until they couldn't pay for bread, and until the lines were around the corner for a loaf of bread. Wasn't any different in Germany in the 1920s. Same thing. Poverty was everywhere. Degeneracy was everywhere. But when people couldn't eat, that's when a change was made. That's when the people stood up and said no more. So you can either get ahead of it by stocking up and doing the things that you need to do, or you can act like it's not going to happen. Again, as Dr. Robin McCutcheon says with regularity, as numerous people say with regularity, it's better to have it than not need it, than need it and not have it. So there you go. There's also this, again, regarding Donald Trump and the so-called pandemic treaty. This was from the Washington Stand on May 29th, that Trump vows that he will rip up and throw away any WHO pandemic agreement. That's great. The question, of course, becomes, what hospital conglomerates are going to go along with something anyway? Not to mention, why would they make it public? It's already their policy. In many cases, it's already their policy. The only reason that Kaiser Permanente has changed their policy is because they've killed off their employees and they need employees. So now they're allowing individuals to reapply who they once fired because they wouldn't follow their genocidal policies. Again, if Donald Trump wants to abolish something, he should abolish the FDA. He should abolish HHS, and he should abolish all of the laws, and there are endless laws that exist both within those three-letter agencies that they rewrite on a regular basis to engage in medical tyranny. They're already on the books. here in our own country. That's what needs to be eliminated. That's what has to be gotten rid of. Yeah, all the globalists and whatever else, I mean, at the global level, so to speak, metaphorically, I mean, they of course can engage in whatever they want and we can abolish whatever they want. But again, they have people in all government and they have people in all of these avenues of the medical system and the hospital conglomerates embedded within these countries. So as long as those individuals are the ones running the hospitals and running these private organizations that are pushing all of this on people, well, then nothing's really going to change. Again, it has to be criminalized. This kind of medical tyranny just has to be criminalized. I've got 2 quick stories here, and then I have one old Substack from approximately a year ago that I want to bring up, which is awesome. It's a great little Substack article, and it was titled, "There is no virus, there is no lab leak." It's exquisite. But before I get to that, I want to mention this, because this is a perfect example of, again, the media lies and the acceptance even among the so-called right. This was from the Epoch Times under their Epoch Health particular section of their publication. And again, this is part of the narrative control. This is the half-truths mixed in with even more lies. And here was the headline, and this was just from, let me see here, the 29th of May, 2024. It was titled, "Masks Found to Be Ineffective After First Omicron Wave, So Saith a New Study." The subtitle is, "By the second Omicron wave, wearing masks was shown to offer no protection for adults and potentially increase the risk of infection in children." Now, again, I'm just reading the headline so that you can understand the lies in this. There was no Omicron, there was no wave, and there was no variant. None of that existed. They came up with the Omicron wave or the Omicron variant name and all those other variant names, and there were many, if you recall, that were all designed to justify the constant increase in illness among the so-called vaccinated. That was the point. That's why they did it. Well, the reason we're seeing sick people now in the hospitals is because COVID's changing. And it's mutating and it's getting worse and there's different variants and they're spreading it from person to person. It was all a lie. All of it was a lie. We picked up on this. A lot of people didn't. People still think there's variants. COVID's always going to be here. It's like the flu. It'll always be here now. So get a yearly COVID shot. People who take yearly COVID shots are going to die faster. That's all. They'll die quicker. But this is coming from the Epoch Times. So again, is the Epoch Times in their article saying that variants are fake? No. Are they saying that they created this entire variant fairy tale in order to justify the fact that endless individuals who took those shots are sick, dying, and dead and were making their way into hospitals more so than those who were not jabbed? Are they saying that? No. Are they assuming that their readers are just going to know what the truth is? It's possible. But they would do well to just come straight out and say it. That there was no pandemic of the unvaccinated as the enemy would lead people to believe. It's quite the opposite. The pandemic was stupidity. The pandemic was brainwashing, mass formation psychosis, 1,000 other things, Munchausen syndrome and cognitive dissonance and narcissism and everything else, brainwashing, torture, MK Ultra, whatever you want to call it. And then at the exact same time, the rest of us who were watching all of this happen and saying, "What are you all doing? Stop it. Cut it out." This is the fairy tale. And anybody pushing this fairy tale is the problem. Whether it's Alex Jones, Peter McCullough, you name it doesn't matter. Anybody pushing the bird flu fairy tale is lying to you. Anybody pushing the COVID variant fairy tale to you is misleading you and lying to you. So shame on the Epoch Times. Again, if you're going to highlight a particular story, where you're highlighting that masks don't work. Well, no kidding, because nothing is airborne. Wireless technology is airborne. That's a poison. 5G coming up now on 6G. These are poisons too. Again, this is not about having a faster cell phone. That's not it. That's the fairy tale. Here's another one. This is again from slaynews.com. Unvaxxed deaths recorded as unvaxxed to make COVID shots appear safe, official data shows. We know that. We know that. We know that that's what they were doing in the hospitals. They were purposefully writing computer programs to delete individuals' medical records so that if they died while jabbed, they would delete that they were in fact jabbed so that they could say that they were unjabbed. This, of course, is fraud. This is money laundering. This is statistical fraud. It's medical fraud. It's whatever fraud you want to use. And I would go so far as to say that it's racketeering across the entire, frankly, medical industry and all of these hospital conglomerates. They all engaged in it. They were telling people to take the test, get jabbed, they got paid, and then when they died, after putting a ventilator on them, that got them more money, the ventilator alone. The protocol to kill them got them more money, and then once they were dead, they went delete right on their medical records to show that they were unjabbed. And then they would get more money that way too. To then, of course, justify their false story of, well, it's only the unjabbed who are dying. Ladies and gentlemen, they're all criminal organizations, all of them. And they're using the brainwashed to carry out their agenda. And it's been working. And it's not going away. They're still doing this. Now this leads me to the Substack article, which again is fantastic. This is from Francis Leader, and it is francisleader.substack.com, and this was dated July 22nd, 2023. It was titled, "There is no virus, there is no lab leak, but people did get sick. Read on to find out exactly why." Now, as I've brought to your attention, and as you know, this was coordinated 5G. That's what was creating the endless plethora of symptoms among numerous individuals. The other reason, of course, was 2019 flu shots and 2019 inoculations, regardless of, I think, the kind. Certainly flu shots, but no doubt about it. That's because when people were injecting themselves with that, which is suspected to be the actual first round of mRNA poison, was in the 2020 shots, that when you combine that, 2019 shots, when you combine that with amping up 5G in 2020, well, there's your response. There's your medical response. So here's what it says. It says, quote, "Why on earth would anyone assume that there are only two possible narratives to explain the last 3 years?" This is a short article, by the way, so I'm going to read it in its entirety because it's thorough and it's fantastic. It says, "In all geopolitical events, there are at least two narratives, one official, usually very obviously false, and at least one other, usually equally false. Then there is the truth, usually something completely different and taboo. There never was a virus. The genetic sequence given to the WHO and distributed all around the world was not derived from a pure sample. It was contaminated with monkey kidney cells, fetal cells, antibiotics, and other standard additives, quote unquote. It was spun by RT-PCR, and the resulting soup was filtered for fragments of RNA. The genetic sequences were fed into a computer and recombined to produce a synthesis which has never existed in vivo." It says the genetic code used to make vaccines was only in silico, written in computer code. There was no lab leak. It is impossible to leak something which has never existed. It says, meanwhile, the root cause of hypoxia, palpitations, breathlessness, neuropathy, hair loss, strokes, heart attacks, seizures, and death was being wired into hushed cities all over the lockdown world. It says if you really paid attention to global totalitarian moves, you could not fail to correlate the rollout of 5G with the incidence of the physical symptoms labeled as COVID-19. Symptoms known to be associated with certain microwaves. Wuhan had fitted with 10,000 towers, and the citizens given new 5G-ready phones, all just in time for the 16th October 2019, the opening ceremony of the UN military games. Competitors became ill. They commented that Wuhan was surprisingly quiet. 5G microwave technology was switched on in Bergamo, northern Italy next. Then Tehran tested their 5G installations, it says. Then London, New York, etc. This was the source. There was nothing to leak. There was electromagnetic radiation overloading our natural circuitry. Hence, the only frail died. But some insist that there was a virus, even though they have never seen one, and the evidence for their existence is thinner than that for leprechauns. And then they, again, highlight another one of the Substacks that they wrote in later July. They said, fast forward to today, the 21st of July, 2023. They said, I'm hearing the third ambulance of the day screaming in and out of my village, here in Dorset, UK. I know that the vast majority of the villagers are elderly and very few of them are fit. I also know that they are all lining up for their regular flu shots for many years, so I assume that they're equally enthusiastic to receive their Pfizer experimental doses which include unknown substances straight into their bloodstream. They wouldn't even consider that this might be risky. This is normal, quote-unquote, healthcare. This is caring about the community. This is doing the right thing, quote-unquote, according to their tell-lie visions, very nice, or those new appendages, their precious iPhones. My dearest neighbor works at the local co-op shop as a cleaner. She had to have 3 vaccines to keep her job. Then they cut her hours from 24 to 16. She's already as skinny as a rake. I don't say anything, but I can't help but worry. They said another neighbor has paved over her lovely, almost manicured lawn. I was curious. Quote, why did you do that, Sue? Unquote, I asked. They said, quote, oh, I can't manage the lawnmower now, she said, looking embarrassed. And then they have charts here as to what exposure to radio frequency radiation, or RF-EMF, does to your brain, eyes, heart, respiratory system, reproductive, and muscular system. I'm going to put that in the war video. I'll save that one. I have another one here, another chart, symptoms reported by electro-hypersensitivity patients. Not good. More RMF charts and statistics over the course of years, along with, of course, radio transmitters in 1904. The U.S. Office of Spectrum Management assigns radio frequency band allocations in 1963, all the way, of course, to the 5G rollout beginning in 2019. Also a great timeline. I'm going to put that in the war video also. And that's the end of the article. And ladies and gentlemen, that's it. It was 5G rollouts, a combination of 5G rollouts, flu shots in 2019, them experimenting with mRNA within the flu shots of 2019, along with, I'm sure, other shots also. And there you have it. Never has been COVID. No lab leak. There's just manufactured poison. And, of course, government-sanctioned wireless technology. You've heard me again bring up the wireless towers that exist in the town where I live. At one time, there were just the big towers, and they were usually on the perimeter of the town. Within the last year, they've put up at least 6 small towers at very precise locations at major intersections. There's absolutely no need for them whatsoever. They don't do anything for internet speed. It does nothing for cell phone speed. It's a weapon. It's that simple. It's designed to make people sick. It's designed to cook people like a microwave from the inside out. I'm going to end with this. I have one more audio here from the Jab Bus from Dr. Makis's Substack page. This is a Brittany Gilchrist. She was a nurse or may still be a nurse, and she's telling a 12-minute story here of her unvaxxed grandmother and how the hospital protocols took her life. So have a great weekend, everybody, as horrible as this is, but give this a listen and understand that unfortunately this is still happening. Again, yes, it happened in the past on a grand scale, but this is still going on today, and that's why I'm still playing these particular videos, even though these testimonies are real. This kind of thing is still going on in these hospitals. So have a great weekend. Again, give this a listen in 3, 2, 1.
All right, yes, we are live. So can you tell everyone your name, please?
Yes, Brittany Gilchrist.
And this is a story about your grandmother.
Yes, it is.
And in the year of
2021.
2021.
Yeah.
And now, did your grandmother take the COVID-19 shot?
No, she did not.
Why did she not?
She didn't believe it. She doesn't believe in it. She questioned it. And, we believe in our freedom and rights to deny or accept, anything that goes into our body or on our body, to have those rights that are God-given and not forced upon us by man. So she was very avid in standing against that, making that choice.
So she clearly went into hospital.
Yes.
Did she have one of those oxygen pulse meters on her finger?
Yes, we actually had to call the ambulance because she was having difficulty breathing. My grandpa got sick at the same time. So, and I'm a registered nurse, so my mom and I moved kind of in to take care of him. We were doing all the things you're supposed to, but she, around day 10, had some difficulty breathing, and I didn't have any oxygen available to give her, so I had to call 911 as she was having, increased work of breathing, and ambulance came actually halfway. I met them halfway, and they transported her down. I followed her. So in the ambulance, she received nasal cannula put on, so oxygen, and one breathing treatment, and they recorded her vitals.
And did she seem a bit better after that?
She did. By the time we got to the hospital, she had improved with one breathing treatment and a nasal cannula.
So why couldn't you take her home then?
So I thought we were. When they wheeled her in and I met her at the ambulance bay back by the ER, I never thought that was going to be the last day that I saw her. I thought that they would, take her and she would just need some support, some oxygen, maybe some fluids, and that she would be discharged. But that was the last day that I saw my grandma alive.
Were you able to communicate with her in any way or form with your phones or something?
In the first couple of days, she actually had to steal a phone. She stole a phone and hid it in her bed.
Whose phone did?
One of the nurses' phones. Yeah, one of the hospital phones she stole.
How old is your grandmother?
78.
Okay, and so she managed to communicate with you?
Yes. And her conversations were always of trying to tell us where the mailbox key was and certain bills. She seemed really frantic about that. And I said, Grandma, just focus on getting better. Just breathe, just calm down and breathe. You're going to be fine. And at that point, I really thought she was. I had no idea that she would, she wouldn't be out in a couple days. I literally thought she was going to be out in a few days and just needed that oxygen. So,
if they gave her remdesivir?
We were adamant that she should not have it. Every doctor, every nurse, every healthcare professional that we had spoken to, we said no remdesivir, none. She doesn't need it. She's 10 days post anyway, even if they thought it worked, which we didn't even know at that time how horrible it really was. We knew enough not to give it, and so we said no. And they didn't say anything back to us. They didn't agree or they didn't disagree. They just hurt us, they just placated us. And she, we actually found in her belongings afterwards that she had written out on a napkin herself, no remdesivir. And it wasn't until she passed in the hospital that I got her records, 3,400 pages of them, and I've gone through them about 8 times. It's taken me about 8 hours each time, and I found a progress note dated several days in that they gave her remdesivir and baricitinib as well.
That's incredible. And what else did you discover from the hospital?
Horrible things. Pressure injuries that were just very horrible and needed wound care and additional nursing care just to treat. They never once mentioned those to us at all. an enormous amount of medications. They actually intubated her when her SATs were like 88, 89. Didn't warrant it, but they said her lungs needed to rest. But at that point, she had been so, overly medicated that her respiratory drive, she was exhausted, but because it was induced by them, not because of the progression of whatever the disease, it wasn't that at all. It was what they had done to her. And so she wasn't able to breathe, they said, but her SATs, clinically, it wasn't indicated to intubate. So they intubated, and then from there on was just hell. The full protocol was unleashed. At that point, we didn't know any protocol was unleashed. We only were believing what was told to us, which was a fraction of the information. The day one, when she was admitted, I was just in the ER, 6 hours. My uncle and I waited in the parking lot just to hear from anyone. 6 hours before we heard one word. And at that point, I had to fight and go all the way up to the house supervisor just to find out how she was doing on day one. And from there on, we never were allowed to see her. We didn't get to say goodbye. We didn't get to be part of her care.
She was with no one when she passed?
No one. She was by herself.
And how did you hear that she'd gone?
We had fought. We had really fought to get in. We actually were there in person multiple times. We called. I made it my mission, for a whole month straight. I called. And I was compassionate. I'm a nurse myself. I know that they're working hard. I know that there are great people in the hospitals, nurses and some physicians. But I called her at the appropriate time. I knew what to ask for, and I was talked down to. I was demeaned. I was hung up on. I was put on hold for 45 minutes to an hour at times. Like, they did not want me calling. They did not want to give information. There were maybe one or two nurses that were truly empathetic and compassionate and gave me, the information, just updates on her care. I know that we fought tooth and nail for normal medications that should be somewhat readily available and accepted, vitamin C and zinc and budesonide and albuterol. And we had to fight for those medications. Pharmacy wouldn't fill them. They told the doctor no and would not fill those prescriptions until he fought for us. And then they started them several days later. Everything was a fight. Things were denied. Nothing made sense at all. It was just absolute evil and chaos. And that was being outside of the hospital walls that I felt that.
Did they call you to tell you?
So yeah, when she passed, yes, the doctor refused us to see her. And then I got a call a day before she passed, and the doctor said, not even hello, how are you doing? He said, your grandma's dying. And I don't know if she'll be alive by 3:00 today. So we all drove down, because we live up in the mountains and this was here in the valley. So we drove down and they still wouldn't let us in at all. And the chaplain came and spoke with us, as well as a doctor and one of the house supervisors, and they said, we'll discuss visitation when we round in the morning. I never got that call, and she passed that night. And when we called, because I checked in all the time, I called to check on her, which is so interesting. It was October 1st, so she had fought for 1 month exactly. And I called that night to check on her, and her nurse said, I don't know how to explain it, but she's improving. Her heart rate is a little bit better. Her SATs are a little bit better, which is just shocking because they said she's never going to improve. They were pushing palliative care from like the first weekend, comfort measures, palliative care after she was intubated. And I said, that's great. Praise the Lord. We were just so excited. And 45 minutes later, I get a call from the doctor. Your grandma's dying. You need to get down here. And I'm like, what happened? I just talked to the nurse and he wouldn't give me any information. My aunt and uncle got dressed and hurried down as soon as they could. And by the time they got to the front door, I got a call from the nurse saying that he was sorry, but that she was gone.
I'm sorry. Let's just show everybody a picture of your grandma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my grandma and my grandpa.
And how's he doing?
He is struggling. He misses her every single day, as we all do. He was sick at the same time, and so he was 90 at the time, so he was 12 years older than her. And I had to take him down too because I was really concerned about him. He needed fluids and oxygen as well. He said, okay, I'll go, but you're not leaving me. I said, okay. His grandma was in the hospital at the same time. And so I took him down and I took him to the ER. It was a different hospital altogether. And immediately they separated us to triage him. And I forced my way in and listened at the door. And they said, we're going to keep him. He needs to be admitted, but you can't stay. And I said, he has macular degeneration. He's hard of hearing. He needs an advocate, And she brought 3 additional male nurses to stand in front of me and just stared at me, trying to convince me. I don't know what they tried to convince me, but I said, I'm not leaving him, and they said, well, you can't stay. No one can stay. Even those that have mental disabilities, no one can have an advocate or no one can have a person stay with them. I said, that's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense from an infection control measure. It doesn't make any sense at all. And so she said, I can hear him. He doesn't need anyone. So I said, what did you ask him? And she gave me some explanation, and I asked him, and it was completely wrong. And I said, there you have it. So she said, well, I'm sorry, you can't. And so I told my grandpa that they want you to stay, but I have to leave. And he looked at me and he said, well, let's go home. I said, okay.
Wow.
So I said, okay. So I had to wheel out of that little triage room with them all standing right behind me. And then I was followed all the way out, saying that I was committing elder abuse, that it was absolutely horrible, that I would take him home, that he wanted to get better, and what a horrible person I was, yelling at me the entire time I was trying to wheel him
And who's
out.
yelling at you?
The nurse.
The nurse.
The nurse, yeah.
And what's the name of this hospital?
This one that my grandpa that we, ran from was Kaiser here in Fresno.
And what about the one that
St. Agnes.
was where your grandmother was?
Yes, St. Agnes. And the reason they took her there was because it was the hospital with the shortest line, so to speak. Yeah.
And so what's your message to people? Because you've come all this way, and thank you for that, to talk to us about what happened to your granny. What would you like people to know?
That everyone needs an advocate. That currently in the situation that we are in the way that our world is, and the hospital systems and organizations, is that you have to speak for yourself. You have to speak up. You have to advocate for yourself. And you have to do your homework. You have to be involved. And unfortunately, we can't trust the system. There's incentives everywhere. The reason why they didn't do budesonide and albuterol is because they were doing a combo and getting kickbacks from that. It's just absolutely insane what's going on. And sometimes we want to bury our head, but we have got to open our eyes and open our ears. We have to speak up and speak out, because that's how we're going to save lives and hopefully change the trajectory of this system. This corruption is what it is. And I've been on every single side of the bedside as a nurse. As a patient myself, I was in a rated unsurvivable car accident and know what it's like to be as a patient, and then a family member of a dying loved one. And you have to be involved. You have to ask questions. And if you are not in the medical field, you need someone that can come with you to be extra eyes and ears.
Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.